Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and it's time for another essay by E.V. Lucas. Edward Verrill Lucas, Victorian, Edwardian writer, publisher. As was described by someone, he spoke less words than he wrote. Yesterday we left off with that I read through the entirety of the essay. It was a bit dark. But this one appears to be dark, but it's not. It's quite interesting, I think. It's basically a book review of an old book that he's doing. So let's start. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a few props as I go through and interject with a few explanations which I think might be useful. It's an essay concerning the miseries of life. And as I usually do, I read the first paragraph in its entirety. What, my poor sir, are the senses but 5 yawning inlets to hourly and momentary molestations? What is your house while you are in it but a prison filled with nests of little reptiles, of insect annoyances, which torment you the more because they cannot kill you? And what is the same house when you are out of it but a shelter out of reach from the hostilities of the skies? What is the country but a sandy desert at one season, or a swallowing quagmire at another? What is the town but the upper Tartarus of smoke and din? What are carriages but cages upon wheels? What are riding horses but purchased enemies whom you pamper into strength as well as inclination to kick your brains out? What are theatres but licensed repositories for ill-told lies, or stifling shambles for the voluntary sacrifices of time, health, money, and morals? A senatorial debate, when you have fought your way to it. What is it but a national main of cocks? What are games, sports, and exercises but devices of danger and fatigue to the performers, and schools of surgery to the practitioner who may happen to look on? What are society and solitude but each an alternate hiding place from the persecutions of the other? Libraries, what are they but the sepulchres of gaiety, or conservatories for the seedlings of disease? Nay, to descend still lower, what are the indispensable processes of eating and drinking but practicing lectures on the art of spoiling food? Or what even the familiar operations of dressing and undressing by stinging remembrances of the privileged nakedness of the savage? And then Lucas starts. This is a quotation of a introduction, or part of an introduction to a book called The Miseries of Life. It says, at the beginning of this century, a humorous work appeared entitled The Miseries of Human Life, or The Groans of Samuel Sensitive and Timothy Testy. From the introduction to which the above passage is taken, the book was so popular that a sequel was called for. The two ran through several editions in a few years, and won the commendation of Sir Walter Scott, who wrote to the publisher saying that The Miseries of Human Life contained some wit, much humour, and perfect originality. The authorship, as is always the case when an anonymous work is widely read, was attributed to several hands, a circumstance which the true author explained in a private groan appended to the second edition, publishing a book incognito with the misery annexed of seeing one's literary delinquencies accumulated to the heads of the guiltless. His name was eventually printed on the title page of the 6th edition, the writer turning out to be the Reverend James Beresford, Fellow of Merton and Rector of Kebworth in Leicestershire, who died in 1841. And he says, The Miseries of Human Life was confessedly a satire, yet it is unlikely that it had any ameliorating effect, partly because grumbling is to the grumbler so sweet a luxury, misery to the miserable so dear a happiness, that for other reasons to be explained later, Mr. Beresford had instead the satisfaction of seeing his point entirely missed by the great many persons, which is the penalty or privilege of the ironical mind, one of whom issued an antidote to the miseries of human life in the shape of a book recounting the history of the widow Placid with her daughter Rachel. This work, the author of which was Mr. Corp, stated the direct means that Mr. Beresford had laboured to convey obliquely, but Mr. Corp was without humour, and in his pages the moral superiorness of the Quakers were a thought too emphatically instead insisted upon for the work to have popularity. And he says that the Miseries of Human Life is preposterous enough. Two old gentlemen, Mr. Timothy Testy and Mr. Samuel Sensitive, vie and recording and praising the causes of discomfort, as Bouvard and Pouchet, which I am reading at the moment, which is quite apropos. I had no idea that it was a reference to this, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I should be done in the next day or two. I'm reading it a bit slowly. But yeah, he says, as Bouvard, Pouchet, and Flaubert's satire sought knowledge, so these two warped enthusiasts seek tribulation in the daily round. Testy is more thorough, impatient, and intolerant. He feels acutely and profoundly sensitive. He feels acutely and profoundly. Sensitive stands aside and notes more objectively. Testy, as himself explains, shrinks from the hard knock, sensitive from the hard word. In the end, sensitive is turned from the pursuit of misery to philosophical resignation and even optimism. Testy dies in a fit. Other characters are Ned Testy, an Eton boy, and confirmed punster with the devilish memory of classical tags, and Mrs. Testy, who remains a shadow. Regular meetings are held at which long lists of miseries are read out by the old gentleman, while Ned Testy occasionally interpolates a pun. The range is wide, covering miseries of town and country, of travel and reading, of eating and visiting, of games and theatres, in fact, including most phases of life. It just sounds like a fascinating book. I'm going to have to look it up. And he goes on, like the rest of the essay basically is just snippets of some of the miseries they talk about and through the book. So I'm going to jump to a few. I'm not going to do them all because, as I say, it's a longer essay or book review. Trying to find some better ones here. After telling at much length a scarce and curious anecdote with considerable marks of self-complacency at having it to tell, being quietly reminded by the person you have been so kindly instructing that you had it from himself. After having left a company which you have been galled by the raillery of some wag by profession, thinking at your leisure of a repartee which, if discharged at the proper moment, would have blown him to atoms. While you are laughing or talking wildly to yourself in walking, suddenly seeing a person steal close by you, who you are sure must have heard it all, then in an agony of shame making the wretched attempt to sing in a voice as like your talk as possible, in hopes of making your hearer think that you had been only singing all the while. Um, let's see. Yeah, he just goes on, and some of them are excellent. And let's see. Oh, yeah, on entering a room to join an evening party composed of remarkable, grave, strict, and precise persons, suddenly finding out that you are drunk, and, what is still worse, that the company has shared with you in this discovery, though you thought you were, and fully intended to be, rigidly sober. Uh, yeah, on your entrance to a formal dinner party and reaching up your hat to a high peg in the hall, bursting your coat from the armhole to the pocket. And he says, between miseries there are one's own causing and miseries that outside circumstances produce, as distinctions should be drawn, such as impersonal affliction as the lateness of a train would not be worth noting in any book of this kind, nor so momentous and real a calamity as the breaking of one's leg. These are too objective or too serious. Mental miseries are almost the only ones worthy the notice of the philosopher. Miseries for which one cannot reproach oneself being to a less important class, as the domestic psychologist who ought to undertake the revision and improvement of the book would, of course, point out nearly all railway annoyances belong to that category. Testy and Sensitive, by the way, were strong on the miseries of travelling. Many of their charges against stagecoaches have only to be transferred to cabs and railway compartments to the applicable now. Thus, the groan, and quotes again, the coach window glass that will not be put up when it is down, or down when it is up. And then goes on and says, yeah, in the room of an inn in which you are confined by the rain or by the sudden indisposition the whole day, finding yourself reduced to the following. And at first for the morning, examining the scrawled window panes in hopes of curious verses, and finding nothing more piquant than I love pretty Sally Appleby of Chipping Norton, sweet Dolly Meadows, and it goes on and on. It says, etc., together with the sundry half-finished initials scratched about. Yeah, it's another one here. The interval between the dentist's confession that your tooth will be very difficult to draw and the commencement of the attempt. Taking a step more or a step less than you want in going up or down stairs. The task of inventing a new dinner every morning devolving on you in the long absence of your wife. Attempting to open a stiff blade of a rusty knife at a well-worn notch with a short thumbnail. It just goes on and on. All these things, like just gripes and moans and groans, and I just love it. I find it hilarious. That's why I do have to find the book. And it says, today we have similar tobacco here we go. This is Lucas now again. We may make other changes to date. Neither Mr. Testy or Mr. Sensitive seem to have smoked. Had they done so, their groans would have been fewer, for no good smoker has cause for grumbling when once his pipe is lit, and no good smoker foresees cause for grumbling without lighting his pipe as a prophylactic or palliative. But both the old gentlemen took snuff. Here is a groan born of the habit. And quotes again, on the road, suddenly finding stock of snuff exhausted, then on flying to a shop in the country town at which you are told they have all sorts, nothing but scotch. Yeah, and he's got theater groans, and he talks about in the pit at the opera, a broad-shouldered fellow, 7 feet high, seated immediately before you during the whole of the ballet. On the going to the play to see a favorite performer, to be told at the drawing up of the curtain, as you had argued from the rueful bow of the speaker, that he or she is suddenly taken ill or dead, and that Mr. So-and-so or Miss the hacks of the house has kindly undertaken to try and read the part at 5 minutes' notice. And this is a very slight change, modernness, the following groan. After having sent for the other end, from the other end of the kingdom to Hokum's for a quality of chosen books, all particularly named, receiving in return 6 months afterwards a cargo of novels of their own choice, with such titles as Delicate Sensibility, Disguises of the Heart, Airs of Tenderness, etc., etc. Then, if you venture to despair on the few pages being edified in the margin by such penciled commentaries as the following: I quite agree in this sentiment. Or, how frequently do we find this to be the case in real life? Or, why did she let him have the letter, etc., etc., concluded by the reader's general discussion upon the merits of the book, stamped in one ocular sentence, for example, "This is a very good novel," or, to the horror and confusion of the author, if he should ever hear of the critique, "What execrable stuff," and substitute Maudie's for Hokum's, and with modifications the case applies today. Now, Hokum was a Thomas Hookham, or Hookham, I guess is the pronunciation. Was a late 18th and early 19th century bookseller, and he started a lending library that you would send stuff, and by the sounds of it, you would ask for things, but you wouldn't get what you asked for. And then later, it was bought out by Maudie's library, lending library. And I've got a 3-volume set, and they're very popular novels, and it has the sticker here and with the address and everything for Maudie's. And that's Charles Edward Maudie who bought it out. He was a bookseller as well. And I just found that interesting, hence pulling out the examples. And then he goes into cricket. He says, cricket by 2, so that when in you have to run a quarter of a mile behind the wicket after every ball you miss, your antagonist delivering it to the force of a cannon. And let's see here. Yeah, riding, as an example of riding, riding a horse at the moment when your horse is beginning to run away with you, losing your stirrup, which runs away too, and bangs your instep raw, as often as you attempt to catch it with your foot. And yeah, he just continues on with all these all the way through, and but there's one other section that I wanted to find here, because he talks about opening a book that is an unopened book, and if I can find that, I've lost it now. Sorry, I can't find it, but he basically is making fun of how you open a book, and which means that, like, there were a lot of times that when it wasn't cut properly, or didn't cut all the pages, so a book was like that, pages, and it talks about how to do it with your finger and ripping the page and all sorts of trivialities if you're not doing it correctly. And just to end everything here, let me. He ends the essay with the miseries of human life died with its own generation. Although sometime in the 1850s, an American writer took the book in hand, adding miseries of his own, Americanizing the text and multiplying Ned Testy's puns. His efforts is not valuable. Since then, the book has remained undisturbed and will so remain until our domestic psychologist makes it the germ of a catalog of minor normal woes, mental rather than physical. Such a catalog would not but be interesting. So yeah, there we go. I thought it was going to be a dark essay concerning the miseries of life, but it actually turned out to be quite humorous. And I just found it very interesting that it mentions the book that I'm reading now, because it is very similar, because these two guys but they're doing things for knowledge, but they talk about all the miseries that they go through getting there and failing as they go along. So yeah, next one, last one actually, is the last essay, if I find it here, concerning a gentle advisor. Again, I'm not sure what that is. It's fairly long as well, but we'll get to that hopefully tomorrow. I've got some books actually coming tomorrow from Amazon, and I might show those if I have the time to do that. But anyway, have a good evening, BookTube. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it very much so after the dark one. Darkish. I had dark moments yesterday. Thank you.